welcome. First, I'd like to thank the library for having me here today, but just as important, all of you who were brave enough to show up to talk about Wisconsin's most haunted places from the safety of wherever you're watching this program. So with that, let's begin. My name is Chad Lewis. I'll be your presenter for this program. And although my background is actually in the field of psychology, for the last 25 years I've been traveling the world in search of the strange and unusual. Everything from hunting for vampires over in Transylvania, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, crop circles, UFOs, alien abductions, really weird people, odd places, you name it. If it's just strange and a little offbeat, I've traveled the globe in search of these oddities. But for this program, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is ghosts and haunted places. For the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to take a tour across the entire state. I'm going to give you the background, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts. I'll talk a bit about some of our research at these places. Heck, I'll even provide you with the directions to these places. But I'm going to leave it up to each and every one of you, whether you're a diehard skeptic or a true believer, or somewhere in between, to venture out to these places on your own and determine for yourself whether or not you believe they're haunted. Many people have seen shows on TV about hauntings, but it's much different when you're out looking for them. Because when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you see that shadowy creature lurking from tree to tree, you simply can't turn to another channel and forget all about it. So with that in mind, let's explore some of the scariest places in Wisconsin. And when I mention haunted places, many people often think of cemeteries. The reason being is quite simple. Back when cemeteries were chosen, they were thought to serve as a portal between our world and the spirit world. So when your loved one passed on, it would just be easier for them to travel from our world to whatever world you believe they go to. But regardless of whether or not you believe this theory, many places in Wisconsin feel like it's working in reverse. That the living are not moving into the dead, but the dead are coming back to our world. We're back to Spring Grove Cemetery. And based on what just happened, this is a completely fitting and timely case, because this is the final resting place of a Confederate spy, Belle Boyd. What happened during the Civil War is she would come up to the north, flirt with the northern soldiers, get their information out of them, head back to the south and give it to the generals down south of all the information. And when the Civil War was over, Belle Boyd went on a speaking tour. And this is her final resting place that many people think is haunted. But what's interesting about this is we're not in the South. This is in Wisconsin. And not only is it in Wisconsin, it's in our biggest tourist destination in Wisconsin. Right outside of Wisconsin Dells is the cemetery. The reason being that she was buried there is after the Civil War, she went on a speaking engagement, traveling the country, talking about her spying for the Confederacy. And she passed away after giving a presentation in Kilbourne, which is now Wisconsin Dells. There was a lot of argument when she died. Many Southern groups wanted her brought back to the South to be buried on Southern soil. But her family said she died in Wisconsin, she should be buried there. So there was a compromise. They brought up a truckload of Southern dirt to bury her in Wisconsin so she could be buried in the South while up here in the North. But ever since she passed on, many believe her grave has been haunted. In fact, many unsuspecting people traveling to the cemetery often report seeing what appears to be Civil War Confederate soldiers walking through the cemetery. At first glance, they're thought to be someone dressed up in a period costume or recreating the Civil War reenactment. That is, until these people vanish right before the witness's eyes. When I went there and talked with the cemetery sexton, he told me people always have stories about Belle Boyd. In fact, he told me the legend of a former cemetery caretaker who was working one day when all of a sudden he saw what appeared to be a bunch of Civil War fighters surround Belle Boyd's grave as though they were protecting it, and then vanish right before his eyes. He simply, according to legend, walked down to City Hall, put his keys on the counter, and said he quit and refused to ever return once again. Her grave is still there, protected by this surrounding, and I don't know if there'd be much of a fuss if they wanted to ship her back south today in the climate we're in. But one of my favorite cemeteries is right outside of Appleton. It's Riverside Cemetery, home to this woman, Kate Blood. It was said that when she was alive, she was a murderous woman who murdered her husband and their 3 young children. Therefore, she would not be allowed burial inside the cemetery proper. And she is down by the river all by herself. If you were not specifically looking for her, you probably couldn't find her. But that's not the scary part. The scary part comes in the fact that many people who go to the graveyard report seeing behind her gravestone what appears to be a hooded figure, dark, standing behind the gravestone. Usually spotted at night, this unknown being will simply vanish into thin air. Well, I spent months and months on this case, researching it to find out whether or not Kate Blood actually killed her husband. Well, actually, I just read the tombstone. You can see here that her husband lived much longer than she did. And even though I dug up her obituary, it listed her as a very important person and going to be missed in the community, the wife of Mr. George Miller. But it's also here that people come out at night, and the dare is that if you walk out to the gravesite, you will see what appears to be blood oozing out of the grave. I say it appears to be blood because those who have seen it told me that when they went to touch it, it was dry to the touch, even though they swore it was blood oozing out of the graveyard. Even though the story's not quite accurate, people still have experiences out here, especially seeing weird lights and oddities along the Stations of the Cross on the walking path. For some, seeing equals believing, but for others, believing might equal seeing. And some cases are just downright weird and bizarre. For that, we head just outside of Portage to a place called Church Road. It's out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. You have to drive down a long dead-end road. And when you do, you'll eventually come to a side road, the cemetery off to your left, tucked away, hidden in the woods. But it's not just the cemetery that's thought to be haunted, it's the actual way to get there. Because to get there, when you go down the road, the story is that many years ago, a young girl took a rope and ended her life on the tree hanging from the rope. And now, when you pass by the road, you will see her spirit waiting for you on the side of the road. But don't let that stop you from going into the cemetery proper, because here people have strange balls of light darting around. They hear odd noises coming from the trees as though somebody's talking or somebody's there. But when they look around, nobody can be found. It's also here that I went with my colleague Terry Fisk. When we were first there, Terry was walking at the back of the cemetery, and all of a sudden he walked into what he felt was this zone. And all of a sudden he felt like he was going to vomit and throw up. But as soon as he walked out, he was fine. When he went back in, the same thing happened to him. I didn't feel it, and I didn't know at the time, but others have reported a similar feeling of being upset stomach or feeling like you're going to vomit while you're at the cemetery. If you're going to stay out here, it's so rural and so secluded that you won't have to worry about anybody bothering you, at least not anyone who's alive. I went to UW Stout for college, both as an undergraduate and graduate student. It's near Devil's Punch Bowl, the aptly named Punch Bowl. For years and years, people have talked about this being a place of mystery and intrigue. Many people will see mysterious balls of light similar to these floating through the area, changing in size, shape, and color as they maneuver their way through the area. I spoke with a group of young teenagers that were debating whether or not they should go in to the punch bowl when all of a sudden they saw a ball of light coming toward their vehicle. They told me this ball of light actually entered inside their vehicle. And I asked them, I said, what did you do when this ball of light went into your car? And they all looked at me as though I was crazy. They said, we got out of the car. But if you do get out, make sure you go down to the punch bowl itself. People have seen apparitions down here. They've seen disembodied lights. They've heard odd noises. It's a place of mystery. One of my favorite stories came to me from a woman who was out hiking with her young son. They were just about to leave, heading up the steps here, when she decided to take one last look back and looked back at the waterfall and noticed this creature staring back at her. Something straight out of folklore. Said it was about 3.5, 4 feet tall, pointed hat, pointed ears. Again, something right out of a movie. A little person, a fairy, a gnome, a goblin, a troll, the little people, the sprites, the good folks. She immediately grabbed her son and said, hey, do you see this? And by the time he spun around, the creature had either run into the woods or through the tunnel undetected. They hightailed it out of there. I also spoke with the UW Stout football player who was taking his girlfriend down to the punch bowl to really scare her, to get her into the mood for Halloween. They got about halfway down when they both heard a growl from some creature they could not identify. And his plan worked, except it wasn't the young woman who got spooked. It was the football player who got scared and ran back to the parking lot. I spoke with the young woman who told me she sat there for another 15 minutes or so, waiting for the creature to reappear or make another noise, but then she felt bad and had to go rescue her boyfriend. And being that those of you watching from Delavan, even though it's not your traditional haunting, I had to throw in the case of the Beast of Bray Road because it's so close to you. Now, thanks to my good friend and colleague, Linda Godfrey, Wisconsin is now known as the werewolf capital of the world. It all began when Linda was working as a journalist in Elkhorn. She started receiving reports of people traveling down a small stretch of road called Bray Road. There, usually at night, but not always, people would report seeing, for a lack of a better term, a giant werewolf-looking creature on the side of the road. To make matters worse, this creature was reported to be a biped, running and walking upright on its hind legs like you and I do. The good news is that the creature was spotted often on the side of the road, but outside of charging at a couple of vehicles, it seemed to be more frightened of witnesses as witnesses were of it. And rather than attack, it seems to eat roadkill or freshly killed prey and try to scurry into the woods undetected and away from human involvement. So the good news is if you go looking on Bray Road for this werewolf, most likely you won't get killed. Well, 50-50. Well worth the chance. Other stories have a long history of paranormal activity. If you're ever lucky enough to drive along the Mississippi River, dividing Wisconsin and Minnesota, you'll come to Maiden Rock, an outcrop of rock near the town of Maiden Rock. It has a long history of being a paranormal place. The first native people knew that it was a weird location. One of the earliest legends, several hundred years ago, tells of a young native princess, Princess Winona. And there are many variations to the legend, but they all come down to she was not allowed to marry her true love. She was going to be forced to marry someone she did not love. And rather than settle for a life of unhappiness, she took her life and started singing a death song and was said to have jumped off Maiden Rock, where she met her end on the rocks below. Ever since that time, people claimed to have seen her spirit out on Maiden Rock. When the steamboats came up and down the Mississippi, they too reported seeing what appeared to be a woman diving off the cliff to her death down below. But when they inquired as to where she was and what happened, she simply wasn't there. Pardon me. As I said, these stories go back a long ways. Hundreds of years, old newspaper accounts tell of the weirdness. In fact, Laura Ingalls Wilder, who was born in Pepin, said, "I was born in a log house within 4 miles of the legend-haunted Lake Pepin. But I have to warn you, if you're going to look for the Maiden Rock Princess Winona, be careful when you're in the water searching for her, because many believe there's a sea serpent in Lake Pepin as well, called Pepe, the lake monster of Lake Pepin. But maybe dipping your toes in a haunted sea serpent infested waters is not your way of relaxing. So maybe you want to head to Baraboo, to the old Baraboo Inn. It's a tavern and saloon right now, but in the old days, it was a hotel and brothel. Legend is, noted gangsters visited the place quite often, including Scarface himself, Al Capone. It was also a place where many people walking by the outside have reported seeing what appears to be the ghostly image of a flapper girl or a lady of the night that used to work at the bordello. Inside, they've seen her as well. People have had their name called out, but nobody's there. They've been tapped on the shoulder. They've been sitting next to an empty seat when all of a sudden it just falls over on its own as though it's thrown by some unseen force. Many people have encountered the ghost of a cowboy-looking man in the restroom as well. And these are just all the stories that happen on the main floor, without even going into the creepy old basement where many people get a dark, sinister feeling. But without a doubt, the most commonly asked question I receive is, where can I go to spend the night in a haunted place? Well, if you have that macabre sense of adventure, you're in luck. Because in Wisconsin, we have all kinds of haunted lodgings. My favorite is a place in Milwaukee called the Ambassador Hotel. Today, it's a very upscale, wonderful location. You'll love staying there. But back in the 1970s and 80s, it was a cesspool. They rented the place out to drug dealers, prostitutes, criminals. Even the occasional serial killer would spend the night there. This is Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal of Milwaukee. Many nights Dahmer spent at the Ambassador Hotel. And one night, back in 1987, Dahmer went out drinking at a bar and picked up this gentleman to bring back to his room. They drank the night away. The next morning when Dahmer awoke, the man was dead. Dahmer claimed he had no recollection as to what had happened. But instead of going to the police and explaining the accident, Dahmer did what a lot of people would do. He went out and bought the biggest trunk he could find, came back, chopped the man up and put him in the trunk, and then brought the trunk to his grandmother's house where he said he had lost track of it.
We don't know what happened to it. Maybe it's at your attic or in your basement right now. But since that time, weird things have happened at the Ambassador. People have called down to the front desk complaining that the guests next to them seemed like they were fighting to their death. Many staff members had to tell them that there were no people staying next to them, at least not any that were alive. Others have seen the ghostly image of a man covered in blood walking through the hallway and then vanishing into thin air. It's thought that this is one of Dahmer's victims because we don't know how many people Dahmer actually killed at the Ambassador. Others see Dahmer himself walking through the old lobby. But again, they don't like talking much about this because of its grisly history. But if you're looking for a piece of the macabre in Wisconsin, you may want to check into the Ambassador Hotel. One of the most prevalent and well-known stories of urban legends in America is the vanishing hitchhiker, a woman appearing on the side of the road looking for a ride only to vanish when some unfortunate driver picks her up. It's a great story, but is it anything more than an urban legend? Well, in Wisconsin, we have a variation of this vanishing hitchhiker, and it involves the old Highway 12, which runs north and south through the state, through the Dells, Baraboo area, and beyond. It's here, usually at night, people will be driving when all of a sudden they see a man hitchhiking on the side of the road. Of course, nobody picks up hitchhikers anymore, but they slow down to take a look and to make sure they're not going to run into the person, wondering why somebody's hitchhiking so late at night and who in their right mind would pick him up. And they continue about their way. Only a few miles down the road, they see what appears to be the same exact hitchhiker now in front of their vehicle looking for a ride. They swear it's the same person because they describe it looking identical to the same person prior. That it's always a man wearing an old green army jacket, weathered like it had been 20 years old. And a lot of people, that's the only thing they remember about the situation is that it's a green wearing jacket man hitchhiking. Here's a case of one someone sent me from their encounter about 1:30 a.m. They remembered a man on the side of the road. He wasn't drunk, and they can't remember anything but the jacket he was wearing, like it hadn't been out of the basement for 20 years. I had one gentleman tell me that he was with his wife, and they were driving along when they saw the man on the side of the road. So the husband pulled over and started backing up to give him a ride. His wife said, "What the heck are you doing?" He said, "I'm going to give this hitchhiker a ride." She looked around and said, "What hitchhiker?" There was no one there, but the man was convinced he had seen the vanishing hitchhiker. And he's not alone on Wisconsin roads of seeing things that seemingly are not there. If you ever head to Stevens Point, you'll come to Highway 66, except the locals, they don't call it that. They call it Bloody Bride Bridge. The legend is, many years ago, a young woman was coming home on her wedding night, and she was involved in a car accident on this bridge, and she passed away, bled to death, waiting for help to arrive. Ever since that moment, many unsuspecting motorists driving over the bridge have seen what appears to be a woman in a bloody bridal gown walking over the bridge. One of the first witnesses was said to be a law enforcement officer who was driving over the bridge at night when out of nowhere, a woman appeared in front of his car. He quickly slammed on the brakes, closed his eyes, and braced for impact. And when he came to a screeching halt, he got out to see the roadkill, or the damage, if you will, only to find nobody was there. But he was so convinced, he looked around thinking he had to have hit something, but there was no evidence of a crash at all. He left convinced he had run into the vanishing woman, a bloody Bride Bridge. But the story gets even better, and that involves the dare. And the dare tells that if you park your car on the bridge and you look into your back mirror, not only will you see the ghostly image of that bloody bride, but many witnesses claim that she'll actually be sitting right in your back seat. Now, luckily or unluckily for me, the dozen or so times I've waited for her, she has not appeared in my back seat, but maybe you'll have better or worse luck than I do. But I have to warn you, this is a very busy bridge. If you're going to take the dare, be very careful. I do not want to put you in my next program as another ghost on this bridge. Not all legends continue on year after year. Some are nearly forgotten. And that's exactly what happened in Steinthal, Wisconsin, on the eastern portion of the state. Today, there's not much there. But back in the 1960s and 70s, this was the paranormal hotspot of Wisconsin. It all began with this old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, abandoned, but not empty. People would drive down the road to see this farmhouse because they thought it was haunted. They claimed they would see mysterious lights moving in the house. They reported seeing shadowy figures and weird noises coming from the home, which was thought to be abandoned. Many of them would throw rocks at the windows at the spirits. After several months of the place taking on a haunted reputation, it started spreading to a monster living in the swampland, as you can see from this grainy newspaper photo of the swampland behind the home. Because it was here people kept seeing a Bigfoot-looking creature, gigantic with green eyes. And when I say eyes, I mean eyes because many witnesses reported it had 3 eyes to it. They had no idea what to call the thing, so they called it the Thing. In fact, the old Steinthal Tavern was right here where this chapel now sits. And it must have been a really wild place because when I was researching it, I kept finding all these ads for exotic dancers in the 60s and 1970s. But people would go to the tavern to see the spirit of this monster, the Steinthal Thing. And they would park at the saloon and then look over where my colleague Kevin Nelson is now standing by the old mill, because that's where the spot where the monster was sighted as well. But today, people have forgotten the legend of the Steinthal Thing. They've forgotten Steinthal. And the legend continues on even if there are no longer people there to experience it. With Halloween fast approaching, people often ask me where they can go to get into the Halloween spirit. Where are there several places of hauntings that are right next to one another? So if that's the kind of trip you're looking to take, you don't have to go far. You can head to Whitewater, Wisconsin, known as Second Salem because of all the legends and all the activity taking place in Whitewater. One of my favorite stories, and a story I hear every single year from people, is the legend that on the campus at Whitewater is a special book that you can check out. But it is a book of the dead, meaning that whoever checks it out will drop dead while trying to read it. I'm not certain who returns it every time, but the legend is the book exists and that the librarians do everything they can so you will not check it out and suffer an ill fate. Every year, the librarians contact me, letting me know that they have no such book, which is exactly what somebody who's protecting the book would say. Don't you agree? But it's not just this cursed book that is said to be there. Others believe the place is inhabited by witches. But we all know witches only exist in Hollywood. Well, thanks to the Morris Pratt Institute in Whitewater, it has become Second Salem. The Morris Pratt looked at a new age and psychic phenomena, looking at mediumship and intuitives, and that seem to have cursed the entire town with all kinds of odd stories. If you go out to the water tower, which is known as the Witch's Tower, there are several cemeteries surrounding it, enclosing it. Many believe these cemeteries are haunted, but they're also there to protect the city by keeping the witches and not allowing them to escape into Whitewater, seeking their revenge on those who are now living there. But if you thought these stories were weird, and granted they were, these next cases are going to be beyond bizarre. Next stop, right outside of New London, is one of those roads that every community seems to have. The roads where nobody wants to travel down it, that it has a weird reputation that you don't go there. It's a terrible place to be. And this road happens to be called Marsh Road. And it received its name because on both sides of the road is marshy land. The story of Marsh Road goes back many decades. I've tracked the stories back until at least the 1950s, and they may predate that by several decades too. One of the most told legends of Marsh Road tells of during October, during homecoming week, the king and queen that were voted homecoming royalty went out to the road after the ceremony and a suicide pact and took their lives by hanging themselves out from the trees. And now many people see what appears to be the ghostly image of that couple hanging from the trees, or they see the phantom noose out there as well. But there's another legend that goes along with the homecoming ghosts, a legend that predates maybe even the homecoming story, because that's when people have gone out to the road when all of a sudden they encountered something that shouldn't be there, something that couldn't be there, but yet there it was staring at them. So what were people seeing? Well, maybe I better let you just take a look. This creature, they called it the Goat Man. Some variations have it having an upper torso of a goat and the lower half of a man, or vice versa. Many people have seen this thing lurking about out on the road. In fact, one sinister variation of the legend tells that it was the Goat Man that was responsible for the death of the homecoming king and queen, and that when the bodies were found partially devoured and torn apart, the authorities covered up as a suicide. And now the story tells that if you go out there in October during homecoming time, you will encounter the spirits of those young royalty of the homecoming king and queen. And I have to tell you, even if you don't believe in goat man or spirits, it's pretty eerie walking down this place by yourself at midnight when you hear branches and twigs snapping in the marsh. It's hard not to think that something weird and unusual is going on. This is one of the first cases I ever investigated over 20 years ago, a case I'm still working on to this very day. Right outside of my hometown of Eau Claire is a place called Elk Lake Dam. And one night, two men were sitting here. Don't worry, there's nothing to see in this photo. They were sitting where the arrow is, just watching the water go by, a beautiful location. When all of a sudden, one of them turned around, and where the ghost arrow's pointing, he saw what appeared to be a glowing woman in white standing behind them. Well, he nudged his buddy and said, "Hey, do you know there's a glowing woman in white standing behind me?" His buddy said, "Yep, but I'm too afraid to turn around and look." Finally, they got the collective courage to turn around, and the woman was gone. So were the two men. They hightailed it out of there as fast as they could. One of them was so frightened he refused to bring us back to the location. The other one did. Now, at the time, I was a UW Stout student as an undergraduate studying psychology. And one of the cohorts in my program was a young man named Aram. And he believed he was psychic or intuitive. He could pick up these spirits. So I brought him on the investigation. And when we went there, we wanted to take a photo of each other where the two men would have been sitting that night. But as you can see, his camera malfunctioned. It wouldn't work. It worked earlier, it worked later, but it would not snap a photo. Luckily, my camera did snap a photo. And when we had the film developed, back when people actually used film, we noticed this weird mist or fog that wasn't visible to the naked eye. And it was right in the location where the two men saw that woman that evening. So I started talking about this case quite a bit. After a program, a gentleman came up to me and told me that he lived out in that area in the 1970s. He recalled there was a murder of some sort out there, but that's all he remembered. So I started digging through the newspaper archives, looking for any murders out there. By the time I reached the year 1974, I realized the man was right. There was a murder out there, but not just any murder, a young woman. Her name was Mary, and she was hitchhiking from Minneapolis to Chicago. She was last seen being picked up on the side of the road by this gentleman, who was last seen kicking dirt and leaves over something on the side of the road. The neighbors in this rural area thought it was suspicious, so they called the police. By the time the police got there, the man was gone. The body of Mary was on the ground. She had been stabbed to death. And even though they had a witness description of the man, he was never captured and the case went unsolved. Well, now I decided to go back. If the place was haunted, maybe it was haunted by this young woman, Mary. So I brought Aaron the psychic with me again. He wanted me to take a photo of this pillar, which I did. I took dozens of photos that evening. The only thing out of the ordinary was this weird mist or fog, again, that wasn't visible to the naked eye. It was also here that evening we heard a scream that sounded like a woman up on the dam. Yet it didn't sound quite human, but it didn't sound like a recording either. As we were about to leave, Aaron believed that the spirit of this young woman was going to follow us back to campus. So we decided to take one last photograph, and I'll let you decide whether or not she was following us, because this is what came back when the film was developed. Many people have seen all kinds of shapes and faces and designs in this photo. We didn't know it at the time, but you could write an entire book about legends out at this dam, from phantom hitchhikers to possession to serial killers living right next door, all kinds of oddities. But the good news is that so many people went out to see this, so many people covered it in the media, that the Dunn County Sheriff's Department recently reopened the case looking for this young woman's murderer. They even dug up her body looking for DNA evidence, which unfortunately they did not find, and the case remains unsolved to this very day. Sometimes with hauntings, you get a little bonus as well, that you get a little extra from just a haunting. And that's exactly what happened in Mary Dean. It's an old island that one time was inhabited. An entire town lived out on this island. It was named after a young girl by the name of Mary Dean. See if I can get this off of my screen. I don't know if you're seeing this, but I'm getting people coming in. Anyway, it's named after a young woman named Mary Dean, who was said to have drowned while coming up on one of the steamboats, and her body was buried in an unmarked grave on the island somewhere. And now many believe she haunts the place where she met her end. But there's a dare attached here as well, and the dare is really fun. So what is the dare of Mary Dean? Well, let's take a look. I'm here at the boat. Well, maybe not. I'm here at the boat landing of Mary Dean, where the dare is that if you're
spirit of Mary Dean try to pull you under, and you'll meet your watery grave and spend eternity in the river with Mary Dean. So I'm going to take this there right now. No life jacket, no swimming apparel, just me versus Mary Dean. So let's see how this goes.
I know you're all wondering if I survive or not, but it'll be, and then it will be shallow and deep again. Many people have lost their lives drowning here. Every year, people drown in this spot. When I talked to their friends and family, they told me that the person seemed to be drawn to the area for some unknown reason. You can camp out on the island. You don't need to register. You don't need to pay. You can simply camp. Those who see the ghost say that she acts like a siren, trying to entice you out to help her by saying things like, "I can't swim. I'm drowning. Please come and save me," which do not do. I'm out here in the middle of the river, waiting for Mary Dean to pull me under. So I wait out there quite a while, and then I make my way back to the city.
Well, thankfully, the spirit of Mary Dean did not pull me under into those dark, churning, cold waters of the river. So another dare completed. If you like dares like that,
Site and see me do hundreds of them. You don't have to risk your own life. You can watch some crazy person do it. But the story gets even better than this, because the story tells that when the island was inhabited, a man had several dogs out there, and those dogs were nasty, and they attacked and mauled some children, so the dogs had to be put to death. And now the legend tells that if you park your car at the boat landing of Mary Dean, you might encounter one of those hellhounds, the dogs that people see. Now, hellhounds are large black dogs with glowing red eyes. They've been reported throughout history in nearly every culture on the planet. Many cultures believe these creatures do the devil's bidding, that they guard portals to hell, and that they are a death omen, a harbinger of death, meaning that if you see one, much like seeing or hearing the Irish banshee, it means you or someone you know is going to die very shortly. And many people have seen these creatures out at Mary Dean. In fact, after one program, a big burly biker guy came up to me. You know, the type of guy you wouldn't think would get spooked by anything. He told me him and his buddies drove out on their motorcycles one night to see the ghost of Mary Dean. They had no idea about the reputation of hellhounds being out there. But as soon as they got there, he said they were surrounded by several hellhounds. When I asked him why he thought they were hellhounds and not just wild animals, he told me several things stood out. One, these creatures were nearly transparent. You could almost see right through them. Two, they had glowing red eyes, not a reflection of light, but the glowing was emanating from the creature. And three, no matter how fast they went on their motorcycles, these things could keep up with them. It wasn't until he went to kick one and his big biker boot went right through it that it finally disappeared. He told me he did not stop driving until they hit the safety of Chippewa Falls, which is about 20 miles away. Even when he was telling me the story, you could see he was shaking with fear, even though it had been quite some time since the incident. But as I'm running low on time this evening, I want to end on the type of case that I most often receive. Because the overwhelming majority of people who contact me about a haunting are not contacting me about a serial killer, untimely death, accidents, suicides, murder, mob hits, and the like. They're contacting me because they think their home's haunted. And many of them think it's haunted by a relative. They smell grandma's perfume on the anniversary of her death, or grandpa's cigars on his birthday. Others believe it's haunted by some unknown person or thing, and they're not too happy about it. But I bring this up because I want all of you to keep an eye out, because later tonight, when you all put your head down on your pillows and you hear the wind rustling outside your window, I want you to ask yourself, maybe, just maybe, is it possible that it wasn't the wind and that you're living in a haunted location as well? And with that, I wanted to save the last 10 minutes or so that we have for any questions, comments, or stories that any of you might have. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box now. And if you want more information, my website has more than you could ever possibly want or need. But I really hope your adventure does not end here with this program. Grab one of my books. Go on your own adventure of Wisconsin. And when you do, I think you'll discover that we live in one heck of a weird state. And I mean that in a good way. You're going to see things you've never seen. You'll meet some odd people. And along the way, you might just discover that the scariest thing out there is often yourself. So with that, I would also like to again thank the library for having me here tonight. I can't think of a time in history when the library has served a greater purpose than it does today. With everything going on with the pandemic, politics, and social issues, the library is the fabric that keeps the community together. They're a real treasure for any community that has one. So if you like programs like this, let them know so you get more of these. If you didn't like tonight's program, let them know so you get fewer of these. Either way, they put a ton of work into getting me here, and they should be applauded. And to show some appreciation, if you want to go to my website and plan on getting a book or two, type in the library code, coupon code library. You'll save a discount on all my books. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the library and see if we have any questions or comments.
All right. Thank you so much, Chad. And thank you to everyone for helping us with dealing with our little technical issues towards the beginning. We do have some questions. The first one is, what is your most memorable investigation and why? And in the same vein, have you ever been really frightened on an investigation?
Let me take the second part first because that's the easiest. Have I ever gotten scared? Yes. I say if you're going to these places and you're not getting scared, you're not trying hard enough. These are downright creepy places. So yes, I get scared all the time at these places. One of the places I do not like going is in Plainfield. Now, just the name Plainfield is going to give a lot of your listeners, their ears will start perking up because this was the home of Ed Gein. Now, if you're not familiar with Ed Gein, you can Google him. Actually, do not do it. You'll be cursing my name. But anyway, I was out at Ed Gein's farmland. The house is no longer there. Townsfolk burned it down in the 1950s. But just knowing the grisly history of the place was one of those places I did not like being. I didn't experience anything, but it was just one of those locations where I'd rather not go back. And that happens quite a bit. Oftentimes you're at these locations in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes you're by yourself. Recently, I was just camping with my colleague Kevin Nelson down in a state park in Murfreesboro, Illinois, where the Big Muddy Monster is said to patrol. And at night, we were awoken in the middle of the night by these screeching noises. Sounded like a bobcat was fighting for its life against something big. But when we peeked out, we couldn't see anything. But I can tell you, it got our adrenaline going. Kevin was in his tent with nothing but a screen. Luckily, I had canvas on mine to protect me a little bit. And luckily for us, the Big Muddy Monster did not get us.
Very nice. All right, I have two more things. One, I figure I'll mention this first one before you answer the next question. Is there a way that you can share your screen again with your information? So if they want to go to your website?
Sure, no problem. Let me just go to my website here.
Perfect. And then that way people can write that down while you answer the next question. And the next question is, nearly every theater has a ghost story connected to it. Have you ever investigated any haunted theaters?
Theaters are one of the most commonly reported hauntings of buildings that are possible out there. And I don't know if there's something about the theater where people who do a lot of the theater, they don't do it for a living. They do it because they're passionate and they love it so much that it makes sense that when we pass away, if we do become spirits, why wouldn't we hang out at the places we love while we're alive? Why would we stay at a cemetery? Which may be why we have so many haunted bars and saloons in Wisconsin. But theaters, it's thought that not only that, but they create a lot of energy. And spirits are thought by some people to need that energy for fuel, if you will. And they thrive on it. So they like hanging out at these places where there's a lot of action and a lot of people and energy. So those are some of the reasons people believe that theaters are so haunted. But yes, you can't throw a rock in Wisconsin without hitting an alleged haunted theater.
Does anyone have any other questions for Chad or stories they want to share? You can mention it in the chat and I will be sure to pull it up. So now you said a lot of haunted bars in Wisconsin too. What's a haunted bar in Wisconsin? Like, is there like a really famous one that's kind of near-ish Delavan or no?
Yeah, there are many haunted bars. Probably the Showboat Saloon in Wisconsin Dells is one of the more infamous ones because it's thought to be haunted by several ladies of the night that work there. And they've even named it after one of their ghosts at the Showboat. But a lot of taverns, when you start talking to the owners, you'll find that weird things happen, which I know what you're thinking. You can go to any bar in Wisconsin and see weird things, but these are paranormal things. Perhaps the most infamous in the entire state is up Nelson's Bitter End Hotel and Nelson's Hall up in Door County on Washington Island. It's the bitters capital of the world. They serve more bitters per capita there than anywhere in the world. You can join the Bitters Club by doing a shot of bitters. You don't throw up and you're in the club. They believe Old Man Nelson haunts the place. He was an odd character. It was said that he drank up to a pint a day of bitters for good health. And when he passed on, people started seeing him walking through the area. People have had experiences in the restrooms where they see someone hovering over them, but nobody's there. Bartenders have all kinds of weirdness. So I think because it's up in Door County, it's on an island, and it has that bitters history, that's probably the most infamous haunted saloon in all of Wisconsin.
Interesting. So does anyone have any other questions? Give folks a few moments in case you're typing. All right, so Chad, be honest. Have you gone searching for the Beast of Bray Road?
I've been on many expeditions to the Bray Road Beast. 20 years ago, Linda brought me down there for the first time. And I have to say, again, it's one of those places where even if you don't believe in werewolves, even if you don't believe that it's going to attack you, it's hard not to get spooked there when you're there by yourself at the witching hour and everything is so dark and strange that you can't help but to pick up your pace and wonder. And I think that's just normal, people getting scared. It's a human reaction. Your heightened senses, you're more on alert. And if there is a werewolf out there, if you are scared, you'll be quicker to get away than somebody who's not. So the Bray Road Beast, well worth looking for. Hopefully you won't be attacked while you're there.
Very true. I have another question that popped up. Have you investigated orbs at all, and do you have any thoughts on what they might be?
Well, orbs, if you're not familiar, are these little balls of light that appear usually on cameras. And we found that we often would see them more on digital cameras than back when we used 35 millimeter film. And some people believe that these balls of light are evidence of spirits. You can go online and have people tell you what the different shapes, sizes, and colors all mean. Some think they're evidence of spirits. Others think they're nothing more than dust in the air, or moisture in the air, or bugs flying through. And it could be a combination of all of those. But I found that in the old days with the original digital cameras, you'd get a lot of pixels on there that would show up. But these days, you know, everybody's phone's a better camera than anyone had 20 years ago. So we're finding it very interesting of what these things are. Are they dust? Are they moisture? Or are they spirit evidence of the afterlife? I don't know. I think it's probably a combination of all of it.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Chad, for all of your amazing stories. Again, thanks everyone for rejoining us again after we had our own little weird experience. But I hope you guys enjoyed this program as much as we did. I know I loved listening to the stories. I've been excited pretty much since we scheduled it. So if you guys do have any other questions, please feel free to message. Make sure to visit Chad's website, pick up some of his amazing books. Come visit us at the library and go on some spooky explorations of your own. Thank you guys so much. And again, this will be posted on the Facebook page and on YouTube within the next couple of days. So be sure to watch for it there in case you missed some pieces or want to revisit your favorite stories. Thank you.